as a pastor, you all pay me to think. It's kind of an expectation of the job that I'm thinking about why we do what we do and have some sort of well thought out plan for what we do together. And this week I was sitting at Compass Coffee and I was trying to figure out what I was going to preach about. And then it hit me. Why are we doing this? Why are we here this morning? Why do we get up on Sunday mornings and gather in a church? Why do we sit on uncomfortable pews, which are just a glorified park bench, when we have comfortable couches and comfortable chairs and better snacks at home? Why do we subject ourselves to preaching, both writing the sermon and listening to the sermon? Why do we sit and listen to hymns? Why do we sing hymns? Why do we gather to pray? I mean, theoretically, you could listen to a sermon on your phone or while you're sitting at your desk. You can pray anywhere. Doesn't have to happen here. And when it comes to hymns, why not just sing along with the radio while you're stuck in traffic going wherever you're going? For many of us, attending church is what we do because it's what we've always done. Our parents made us go to church. I mean, listen, when I was a kid, if I was not seated in the third row on the lectern side at Calvary United Methodist Church in Frederick, Maryland for the 8:30 service, I had better have a good reason, like being dead. And maybe you have a similar story. We asked our parents, and we still ask our parents, why do we have to go to church? Well, because you live in my house, and in my house we go to church, so let's go to church. When I was in college, I had a fraternity brother who needed a ride back to school. We were going to leave on Sunday after church, and he lived far away from me, so his parents dropped him off at my house. We were going to get up on Sunday morning, go to church, and then go back to school. And so Sunday morning rolled around, I got up, I put on my church best, and we got ready to go. And I'm like, hey, we're going to church, let's go. And he goes, oh, I don't go to church. And I could feel my mother coming out in me. Well, in this house, we go to church. So he didn't go to church with us that Sunday, and that was the last time my mom welcomed him to stay overnight in our home. There was a time when attending church, when sitting in these very pews, was one of the only ways that you could be engaged in business in your local community. There was a time when sitting in these very pews was the place where you could influence others, whether in policy making in DC, in business decisions in our community. It's hard to imagine church pews as being a place of influence in the local community. Church being the center of local politics. Those are hardly theological reasons for showing up to worship at 10:30 on a Sunday morning when you could be 1,000 other places. Are you here this morning because it's a holdover habit from your childhood? Or maybe you're seeking influence over something or someone. Or maybe you're just like, you know what? I want my kids to be raised in the church. And I need you to know that as your pastor, those reasons don't bother me at all. On Thursday evening, I was reminded by one of you that my job as your pastor is not to judge. I mean, if I was a pastor who judged his congregation and nitpicked every little thing that you do, well, I wouldn't have much of a congregation after very long. I mean, one of the reasons I'm here, though, as your pastor, is to help you name why you're here. And I bet if we peeled back the reasons, there just might be, just maybe, some theology hiding underneath whatever drove you to drive here this morning. Today is Ascension Sunday in the church. This is the Sunday where we remember that Jesus ascended to heaven, ascended to the Father, after spending time with his disciples after the resurrection. Luke tells us that before Jesus ascended, he offered disciples peace. He calmed their fears by inviting the terrified men to touch his physical body. Look at my hands. Look at my feet. See that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have. After Jesus said those words, he ate a piece of broiled fish on the beach with the men. And we pick up the story this morning with Jesus teaching the disciples so that they would understand the Scriptures, so that they would understand every single part of the Holy Scriptures. Not the New Testament, it hadn't been written yet, but the Hebrew Bible. And in teaching them everything they needed to know, Jesus told them that they were now witnesses to what had been revealed to them. And Jesus walked the men towards Bethany, and then he ascended. He was carried up into the heavens. And as he was carried up, he blessed the disciples. If you were to grab the blue Bible that's in front of you in the pew rack, and you were to open it to any given page, close your eyes, point your finger to the page, you will notice that no matter what is going on that particular page, that God is the one who gets the good verbs in all of our Holy Scriptures. What do I mean? You see, before the ascension, the disciples, well, they were terrified. But before we are told that they were terrified, Jesus offered them peace. He said, "Peace be with you." It was Jesus who opened the disciples' minds. They didn't open their own minds so that they would understand the Holy Scriptures. And as Jesus ascended, he offered a blessing to the disciples. They didn't bless themselves as Jesus went up. You see, in the ascension story, Jesus gets the good verbs. And you'll recall from our baptism and communion liturgies that God established the covenant with Moses, not the other way around. When Israel was enslaved in Egypt, God sent Moses. Moses didn't send himself. Moses did not act on his own accord. And when Israel arrived at the banks of the Red Sea, it was God who parted the waters. It was God who established the covenant with David. And when David's faithfulness faltered, when his character failed, God remained steadfast. Ascension Sunday is one of those days on the church calendar that we can easily gloss over because it's a story that seems beyond belief. It's a story that's hard to understand. Because after all, we were not there. We were absent when Jesus told the disciples to touch his hands and look at his feet and see that he had flesh and bone. We weren't there when Jesus opened the minds of the disciples to understand fully the Holy Scriptures. And so far as I know, none of us were in Bethany when Jesus ascended, and we were not present to receive the blessing from him. But you see, the ascension of Jesus is your story. Every Sunday morning, when you are here at Walker Chapel, or any time you gather to worship, there are church growth strategists. It's a job you can get. You can be a church consultant. You thought Deloitte had a lot of consultants. Imagine being a church consultant. But there are some trends that consultants are encouraging churches to become user-friendly or seeker-friendly, meaning that the church exists in part to meet people's felt needs. In this mindset, when 10:30 or 10:35 rolls around and the first notes of the organ are played, we are the center of worship. What we want, what we prefer. We're all here. Everybody's in their seats. Now, organist, you can start playing. Worship, though, only begins when Christ is here, when Jesus is standing among us. When Jesus says, "Look at my hands, look at my feet, see that it is I myself, touch me and see, for a ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have. In saying those words, Jesus is offering us peace in a world that leaves us startled and terrified. Jesus is extending an invitation to live in the light of the resurrection. Life in the light of the resurrection is realizing that things happen when Jesus stands among us. Sundays happen because Jesus is among us now. While we may not have been there in Bethany for the blessing at the Ascension, we are still none the less witnesses to Christ resurrected. Like the first disciples, you are here if for no other reason than because Christ has called you. Naming why we are here on a Sunday morning and naming a reason other than Jesus is a byproduct of a time when we think less and less theologically and more practically. We look for the practical in much of what we do. And when practicality becomes our priority, we always give ourselves the good verbs. We become the heroes of the story, which means that when Sunday comes around, we gather for reasons other than the fact that Christ has called each and every one of us. Because Jesus gave the disciples everything they needed to turn their doubts and fears into praise and worship. He gave them peace, revelation, assurance, and blessing. Because Christ gave the disciples those things, and because Christ has given us those things, we can rest assured that when we are in need, Christ will provide for us. I was recently reading some of the series in the Bible where people are doubting. When they approach Jesus with a question and say, yeah, prove it, preacher, rabbi. Do you all remember doubting Thomas? He says, unless I can put my finger through his hand, shove my hand up in his rib cage, I am not going to believe. What does Jesus do? Jesus doesn't rebuke Thomas. He says, here's my hand. Touch it. Here's my side. Go ahead. Shove your hand in. And even those who sought to challenge Jesus weren't rebuked. They were given what they needed in that moment so that they might believe. You need proof. You want tangible, empirical proof. Jesus says, well, touch the hole in my hand. Feel the bones on my ankles. Oh, and by the way, I'm hungry, so pass me some of that fish and watch me eat it. We are here this morning not so that we will have all of our suspicions answered or to confirm what we have always known. The stories we read, the songs we sing, and the prayers we pray are common knowledge, even for those who are not here this morning. So I ask again, why are we here today? We are here because, like the first 12, we are witnesses to Christ's works in the world. Perhaps the real test of a Sunday morning is not how or why you arrived, but rather how you will leave. Later today, maybe over brunch, or tomorrow if while you're at work, someone is going to ask you, how was church today? How was church yesterday? And you might struggle to find the right words. But remember what Jesus told the disciples. You are witnesses. I've learned through cable news that witnesses tell the court what has happened, what transpired. The witness declares to the world what is true by what the witness has seen and heard, by what the witness has experienced. So go from this place today and tell the court of the world what you have seen. Tell the world what you have experienced. Tell the world how you have been changed. Tell the world what life in the light of the resurrection looks like. Be a witness that gives the good verbs to God so that in hearing The world will know that our ascended Lord has not abandoned us, and that Christ still invites all to experience his grace. And in experiencing the grace of God, Christ promises that none of us, not even you, will be the same. Amen.